And welcome to Tech and Test with me, Peter Johnson. Today on the show, we have Jean-François, who's a software developer, playwright ambassador, author, all those playwright things. Jean, welcome to the show. Do you want to introduce yourself to the Tech and Test audience?
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for having me. So I'm Jean-François Greffier. I'm French. I'm a front-end developer, and I like software craft and testing. I'm also a playwright ambassador, and I just wrote a book about playwright test.
Very nice. It's a very good book. I've read a few chapters. I haven't read all of it, so I'll be honest, but definitely some really interesting chapters on how you get started with Playwright and how you use Playwright. Why do you think Playwright has become so popular amongst like front-end developers or the sort of testing community?
Yeah, so for those that lived in a cave these few years, Playwright is an end-to-end testing framework. Actually, it's an automation and end-to-end. And I think it's popular because it gives you a lot of control on the browser's automate. And the developer experience feels very neat and very familiar if you already used a testing framework like Jest, for example, which is very common.
Yes. And actually, I find it's quite easy to start writing a test case. Like, you don't necessarily have to write a lot of boilerplate code to get a test case running, right? The API is quite simple and easy to use. And um, I know back in the days, maybe some people are familiar with maybe the Selenium type frameworks, which of times gone by, where there's a lot of boilerplate you had to write, like, for example, page object models and all sorts of other code to it almost became mandatory, right? That you had to write a page object model
Right.
to use to write a test, right? But I think with Playwright, you can almost get away with starting to write a test, and maybe if the code starts duplicating, then you can do some refactoring to sort of reduce it. But it's definitely clean and light. And are there any sort of key differences with? I mean, what does the Playwright architecture look like in terms of how it's being used?
So first thing, actually, it's you said that writing test with Playwright is quite easy. I think writing your first test is even easier than that because you can use CodeGen. So CodeGen is a tool. It's a recorder. It will record your actions on the website you wanna test. You can also add some assertions, and then it will generate code for you that you will probably have to rework, but it's a really good start. Another thing that makes it simple, at least to developers that are used to Jest, for example, or VTest, is that it's very similar in terms of assertions. And what's asynchronous is actually using JavaScript await async. So yeah, it makes the test readable. So about the architecture and why Playwright makes stuff easy. First thing is that it's kind of Playwright is kind of battery included, but you can change the paths if you want. So this is a good combination, I feel. So actually, Playwright, it's a library that is outside of the browsers, and it will drive browsers through their debugging protocols. And actually, Playwright comes with their own browsers. So WebKit's browser, this is similar to Safari because there's a limitation here. To run Safari, you need macOS. To run macOS, you need a Mac. So not everyone has a Mac, especially in CI. So the closest thing you will have, it's WebKit, because Safari is built on WebKit. Down here, you have a patched version of Firefox. And here, it's not Chromium anymore. It's a Chrome for automation. But anyway, Playwright can drive whatever browser based on Chromium because it's using CDP. So I said Playwright, it's a automation library that is making end-to-end testing. This is because it comes with Playwright Test. So Playwright Test is testing framework that comes with Playwright. So that means two things. One is that you can just use Playwright library by itself for automation, just like you will do for with Selenium, for example. And you can use Playwright Test or your favorite testing framework to write tests. But sure, Playwright Test is it's made for Playwright. It's tailored for Playwright, and it gives you all kinds of stuff like the test runner itself, an assertion library with what they called web first assertions.
Mm.
So it's able to check what's on the DOM. And okay, is there a button? Is this button no, like a checkbox? Is this checkbox checked or not? And is a text is there or not? Is it on the screen? These kind of things. It comes with the basic fixtures. Maybe we can talk about fixtures later on, but basically you have private test, and then in your test it will fire up a browser and a page for you automatically, kind of, and reporters. In place of that, because sometimes people wonder what private team is doing, uh, the private team also provide a Docker image with everything inside, with the browsers and all, and then AI stuff like the private MCPs, the private agents, the private CLI, and I talk about CodeGen, so some other small tooling. The trace viewer also should be there. So that's when people talk about playwright, actually, up, they probably talk about all of that,
Mm.
or maybe some of that. So that's why I talk about playwright tests to clarify that I'm talking about playwright with the testing part.
I see. Okay. This is a very good distinction. I've not thought about it like this, but it's very clear and obvious now that there's a big ecosystem here, right? It's not just a testing library. There's all the browsers that have to be deployed and updated. And, there is some questions around, are we sort of testing with patched, library, patched browsers, which can, I mean, maybe that could be something to do with some of the limitations with Playwright, right? Are we testing with patched versions of browsers compared to maybe other versions of browsers? But also there's the kind of mobile piece, which I think we discussed before we came on the show, around some of the limitations of Playwright is you can't test with, mobile platforms directly, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. This is linked with the philosophy of Playwright. Playwright basically allows you to automate and test the web on the most popular browsers. So yeah, it does not test on real device, and because it comes with their own browser. So for WebKit, obviously they had to make their own WebKit browser, which I feel is crazy. It's like, okay, let's just make a browser. But because the team behind Playwright, they are very experienced browser engineer, actually.
mm,
There's Pavel, which is the creator of CDP, the protocol, the Chrome DevTools
sure.
protocol. And yeah, so they know how to build a browser. So they have their own build of WebKit, because obviously there's no like easy distribution for it. And so for Firefox, it's a patch version, because I think for the team, the Firefox, the DevTools protocol didn't quite fit their needs.
Mm,
So yeah, Playwright comes with their own browsers, and it's kind of difficult to plug it to a real browser. So for mobile, there's no any support of iOS whatsoever. And for Android, there's experimental support for Chrome and web views, but it's quite limited. Because as I said, I think the philosophy it's to test the web. So in some case, playwright is will not fit your needs.
Yeah. And I think you've made it quite clear, right, with like the kind of philosophy of how Playwright is targeting to maybe why that's the case, like why there's some of those limitations, because it's fundamentally very web first rather than trying to be a test framework or test ecosystem which covers all different kind of browsers and devices, and it's very just focused on solving the web piece. And that could be, like you mentioned, right, with the maintainers of Playwright being very web focused with browser engineers. Maybe that's come into the picture of like why it's developed in that sort of direction.
Yeah, maybe. I also it's might be linked with the history of playwright because um, some people maybe know. Yeah, I don't know if it's well known, but basically the core team of playwright, there are some people that used to work on Puppeteer.
Yeah. Ah, okay.
Yeah, so some basic automation API are very similar to Puppeteer actually. But Playwright goes further because Puppeteer it's an automation library, so you can make tests with that, but you have to plug in
Hmm.
your own test framework. Where Playwright is not only driving Chrome or Chromium, it's driving different browsers, and is made towards testing.
Very cool. And what are some key features within the testing part which make tests so, you know, I'm coming on to sort of the popularity of Playwright and why it's such a easy tool to use. And some of that, it has been to do with like some of the auto rate functionality when you're writing test cases, and also the assertion retries that happen automatically. So all of this kind of features of Playwright make it very easy to have a robust test, because you get all this sort of auto retrying and auto waiting that in days, years gone by, I remember a lot of pain with Selenium, maybe trying to implement some logic there to make the test cases stable and reliable. And you had to do a lot of that by yourself and maintain that code by yourself. I guess now with Playwright, it's all maintained by Microsoft, and you get all of this out of the box. So that's definitely been a feature that has made Playwright really, in my mind, really accessible, because you can now offload some of that maintenance from internally to Microsoft.
Yeah, exactly. Because I too used Selenium years ago, so it's probably better now. But for me at that time, it was really painful because first the WebDriver. Well, the first thing is that the tests they were quite long, so we had to run it during the night, and then the next morning you will see the result, right?
Yeah.
So that was painful already. And then second thing is that it will often fail seemingly randomly. This is what we call a flaky test. It's like it works sometimes. It may work or not work, and it's not dependent on the test itself, but more like on the environment. So maybe the backend took a little bit more time to respond. Some element on the page took longer time, or maybe there's some flickering in the display or something, things like that. So for that, Playwright has some built-in stuff. So that's very interesting. You say that this is built-in, and then elsewhere you might have to do it by yourself, because a framework doesn't make your tests much better, but if you have built-in stuff to make your test more stable, then you don't have to think too much about that. So I remember for Selenium, I had to wait for some time. So this is like really, yeah, it's a really bad practice. Uh, Playwright has different mechanism actually to make your test more reliable. The first, it's auto-waiting on the actions. So before you click on an element, Playwright will wait, and will wait depends on what kind of element and what kind of action. So before clicking on a button, first it will check, is the button there in the DOM? And then is it enabled? It can be disabled, and there's no need to click. Maybe it will be enabled later. Maybe you have some iteration mechanism into your app. And then is it enabled, clickable? Is there a listener? And then, okay, we can click. So that's the auto waiting. It works for different actions. Another thing we said, it's retry mechanism. So for retry, it's also on the web first assertions. It's like we will check that an element it's there, for example, or that the content is there. So we will retry this assertion a few times before giving up. So yeah. And one thing I really like, it's in the developer experience, is that because many things are asynchronous, because first the DOM, it's asynchronous. Some stuff will appear, disappear, change, and whatever. And also talking to the browser, it's asynchronous, because when you make an action through the developer protocol or through a web driver, whatever means you use, actually, when you talk to the browser, you have to say, you have to like, okay, I want to click, and then okay, it would go to some protocol or whatever action, and then okay, it would click. So this is by nature asynchronous, and all of the asynchronous stuff in Playwright Test, it's just plain normal JavaScript. So it's await. So that's why. So that's why you shouldn't forget to await your actions or await the web first assertions. So basically, you expect.
Mm. That's really cool. I think those features will make Playwright a tool of choice, because it's not just the browser connectivity, it is all of that auto waiting that makes it so easy for the test writer to just not have to think about it too much. You can just find the locators and just hope the retries and auto waiting just makes your test reliable. I've definitely seen, from switching from another test framework to Playwright, the amount of simplicity in the code, because all of it's built in, the test just becomes so reliable with all of these mechanisms built in. And the key thing is, you don't really need to delve into that too much unless you start getting particular use cases and failures that you need to look at. But fundamentally, I've seen when I've written test cases in Playwright, they've tended to stay green most of the time for these kind of issues, right? Where maybe the page takes a bit longer to load on that particular case, and you don't get an odd assertion error where using some other tools, a slight difference in timeout or slight difference in page loading would often result in like a whole bunch of weird failures, which then, yeah. So something that comes up quite often is definitely a pattern I've used a lot, which is the page object model. And I think something more recently I've been thinking about, and maybe, is it still relevant, and do we still need to use it for every single test case we write, right? And definitely in years gone by, I think when I first started using Playwright, I was modeling out all the pages I was testing using the page object model, almost like before it even started. It was like a pattern that was drilled into me from the Selenium days of writing test code. So I guess, what are your thoughts on, what is the page object model? Maybe we should talk about what the page object model is, so in case
Okay.
people don't know what it is. But I'm interested to know your thoughts on when should we be using the page object model and when shouldn't we be using it?
So page object model, it's a design pattern that became popular with Selenium. It's a class, it's an object or class that is supposed to represent a page through its selectors and actions you can do on the page, or like the service the page is giving you. Actually, the creator of Selenium said that if you're using selectors directly, you are doing it wrong. So you probably you have to use page object model. And I think it became very ingrained in the mind of many quality engineers, QA, and whatsoever. But I'm a developer, so I don't have this culture of the page object model stuff. So I was just wondering, okay, why I need so many scaffold code for that? And yeah, I don't think with Playwright it's always necessary. Because first, it's not wrong to write locators directly with Playwright. With Playwright, the locators, you will most of the time write them with the syntax of testing library. So it's very easy to read, and I'm actually going to show that. Okay. So actually, in the test in Playwright, you will use the syntax of testing library. So getByPlaceholder, it's some kind of input, and then here it's a action. So I wait it because it's asynchronous. So I fill some input. Actually, all of them it's using getByPlaceholder. Here I'm using some test ID, but very often the locator you want to use is getByRole. So every HTML element has a role. So like a button is a button. That's cool. You can say a div is a button, has the role of a button, but I just prefer to use the element button anyway. So in the Playwright test, it's very fine to use locators directly because they are easy to write and to read. And yeah, here it's very obvious what it's doing. It's filling some form. So that's the first thing, is that you probably don't need to abstract the locators. So how about the actions of a page, or do you need to abstract a page? Well, only sometimes, I would say. There's this principle of try, don't repeat yourself. So it's a principle that says that you shouldn't repeat your code because it's just cluttering your code base. Maybe you're just repeating stuff, and then actually you can make it into a helper function or here a class, and then reuse it. But very often, dry, it's anti-pattern because maybe it's overkill. I don't need to make this page object if I use it one time or two times. And sometimes it's also anti-pattern because you're doing a link between two things that are maybe different. Maybe here I'm filling the address for one thing, and then later in a test I'm filling an address for something totally different. In this example, it makes sense because it's a checkout page, so I'm filling an address to pay.
I see.
So it's okay. But if I made a field helper, a field address helper, then I will have one case which is fill the address for payment on this page, and maybe field address for the other, which are not the same, maybe. So that's too much. That's where dry does not work. So that's why myself, I actually use wet, write everything twice. So the first time you use this piece of code, okay, just leave it in your test. Second time, yeah, it's okay. It's duplicated in two tests.
Yeah.
So what? And then if you write it a third time, then ask yourself, okay, what I want to do and what I can refactor that makes sense and is reusable. So in this case, what I want to refactor and when I want to reuse is not filling an address. It's filling the address for the checkout page and eventually submit it. So in this case, the page object model makes sense.
Yes. In this case, I think you're modeling quite a lot of interaction with the web page for the checkout.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think a class in this case may help because, like you mentioned, you could have different types of pages and different types of forms, and then how many different types of helpers do you need there? But I think the key thing here I've taken away is it's not always necessary, right? So it depends on, you don't have to abstract every single locator within a. Let me ask you how it's actually used in the test case then, because you've defined it here, right? But we've not used it yet.
Yes. So how I use it, let's hide it for now. Usually what you do when you use a page object model is that you take your checkout page class. Okay, thank you, Copilot. And then you make a new instance of it, and then you use the method of that page. So this works because first it's a class, so I can make a new, and the constructor is taking the page object. I know it can be confusing from Playwright. So basically, it's your tab. So if I do that, hopefully, yeah. So what will you do? It's to use an instance of your checkout page. So for this checkout page, okay, thank you, Copilot. You will make a new checkout page, and actually in the constructor, you will use the page object from Playwright. I know it's confusing. So actually this page, it's your tab. And then everything will be done on the page that you pass to the page object model. Then you have your instance of checkout page, and then you will use the method from it. And that's it. So I have a fill, and then I have a submit. That was fast. But page object model, it's only one way to abstract things or to have helpers. The favorite way in Playwright, it's fixtures. Sorry. Fixture like page is a fixture, sorry. So you have built-in fixtures like page or context or other stuff, and you can make your own. So a fixture, basically, it's a function where you can do stuff and inject dependencies. So here, it's when the test will actually happen. And before that, what I do is that I create my instance of the checkout page. But here, actually, I could do other stuff. I could make my own automation here, use some locator to do stuff. Or I can inject my test data or whatever, and then pass it to the test. So here, I just pass the instance of the page object model. Cool thing is that I make this setup, which is here only one line, but it can be much longer. You can mess up with the headers or stuff like that, or have some listeners or mug the network, whatever. And all of that is transparent, and then it just, as I said, a kind of dependency injection. And here we have the exact same thing. And I don't even know how the checkout page works.
Wow.
That's a really
Yeah.
cool thing, because if you are more in a team, if you are more experienced with Playwright, you can set up these fixtures for people to use. So it can be a helper function, can be some logging, whatever, can be a page object model. So here, page object model is just one way to have utility or to extend your test.
I see. Yeah, and because you can just dependency inject a function or a class or whatever in that
Yes.
context, you can kind of still achieve the correct outcome, right? Without having to be a specific use case of only page object
Yes,
model.
and what's really interesting is because it's a kind of dependency injection. It's on demand. So you write your test, you focus on your test, and then you can just pick what you need. Just like when you make a test, you pick the page. You don't know how the page is made. Um, because it's in the it's done on the background in the back office of Playwright for you. Actually, if you had to do it without private test and without without the fixture, you will have to make a new instance of browser,
Mm.
and then from the browser you make a new context, and then from the context you make the page. It's not much, but with the options and the project and stuff, then a lot of stuff it's just being transparent to you, and you can just focus on your test.
Yeah, I think it also makes the test cases very readable, right? Because you can abstract
Yes.
what you want using whatever approach you want, whether you want to do the page object model thing, because or just a bunch of helper functions. At least you can keep your test cases very clean and readable. And something I quite like the pattern of it writing test cases is kind of the range, act, and assert, where you
Yes.
kind of
Mhm.
very cleanly write, what sort of test setup you need and then what your your action is and then the assertion. So it's very readable. And if you use that pattern across different test frameworks and across different technologies, you can end up with very readable, clean test cases that product managers or in theory or anyone else can actually take a look at and read. Although that's yet to be seen. I don't often see a lot of product people going into reading those test cases, but sometimes they do, right? When things tend to go wrong, it's almost like, oh, let's see what test coverage we did have and try to examine where the gaps are, which should be happening anyway, but it often happens
Yeah,
when,
it's often tricky to share the test or the test result to people that are not developers or QA.
yeah,
But it's feasible. At least they can have a grasp from the report. You have few things to help with that, like the test steps. So you can describe, okay, what's this doing?
yes.
And as you said, the arrange, act, assert make it uh, easier to read, or at least you can go through the test case with someone and explain them, okay, first I'm doing all of that. And usually the fixtures and the utils and all, they fall into the arrange part. So you can extract the arrange and then you just have act and assert. So it's, yeah. And I really like, you said that arrange, act, assert can be used with whatever framework. I also use that for different kind of tests, like unit test, and yeah, it's really useful.
It's a very useful pattern, and I think Playwright enables that in you basically multiple ways, right? And I think that's what I like about it. It's not prescribing too much how you set up the arrangement of your test case with the fixtures and or with classes or with Palm or with whatever. It gives you the choice and flexibility to do whatever you
Yes,
want, and I think that's very powerful because then you're not fixed to using certain patterns just because you're using this test framework.
yeah, exactly. But that's also a caveat, I think, because um, many people don't know where to start.
Yeah,
So
and
that's probably why many people start with pages like model, because they are used to that. Um, but it's only one of the option you can use.
yes, yes, that's a good point. And actually, I think if anyone's starting like a Playwright project, some of the tutorials I've seen and potentially some of resources I've seen tend to automatically divert you into using the page object model, right? I think it's even in the Playwright documentation with
Yes,
some.
there's mention of that, and what I just show you, it's basically what's page object model, how to use it, how to make a fixture from it. Yeah, Playwright documentation doesn't especially encourage you on one thing over another. Maybe slightly on the fixture, but yeah, it gives you different possibilities. So that's sometimes the fact that it's not doesn't have a strong prescription. It's
Yeah,
yeah, can be confusing sometimes. My advice here, it's start small. You probably don't need page object model, not all the time. So write everything twice, wet. So try with start with your test and then refactor them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very good advice, I think. I definitely think starting with the test cases is a good way to go. Then you don't. I've definitely seen this in the past where, all this boilerplate is added to a project when you're starting new, and then the tests become a little bit of an afterthought. And then you think, oh, I've coded myself in a corner here because now I've created these. I've tried to dry very quickly, right? And not, create all these fixtures or all of this boilerplate. When another test scenario creeps in and it's like, now how do I test this? I need to untangle some of this code and do a refactor, because now that example with the checkout you gave where you fill out the form, let's say tomorrow there's version 2 and version 3 of that form. And if I'd gone too hard down a particular path, I may have coded myself in a bit of a corner here, because then I have to create fill form version 2, fill form version 3, where actually if there was a bit of wetness with repeating within the test cases, it may have been easier for the test case to read and maintain. It's all up for debate, but I think sometimes also I think we refactor code and make it very simple, but actually, the test cases, the more explanation you can write in the test case, the more explicit you make it, it's easier for the test case to understand, readers of the test case to understand. So some duplication, I think, is acceptable within test cases, I think, if it helps the readability of the test and the intention of the test case.
Yes, because also another thing is that tests are code, but they are not the code of your application. So you don't have to use the same way to make the same way you are making an application.
Mm.
And yeah, as you said, some repetition. It's okay if it makes your test readable. Because if you have your application will probably change over time. Your application on the test will probably change over time, and so you have to adjust your test accordingly. And if your test is actually scattered around different page object model with different helpers and all, then it becomes difficult to understand what you have like in one in a glimpse, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, there's pros and cons, right? With all these different approaches. In one way, each object model can help with the maintenance piece if you have a very large application and you need to keep updating loads of files. You know where you need to target, but I guess that's also true with the helper functions. It all kind of depends maybe how you lay out the project. Um, if you can identify which bits of code need updating quite easily, then it's not such an issue. You had to use all these weird XPaths and div.div, whatever, to kind of get a locator. It was quite complicated. Like basically people used to add data test IDs everywhere to simplify things. And now I think with the API and getting by role and that kind of thing, it's simplified.
Yeah. So you mentioned different selectors that were more popular before, like XPath. So
Mm,
XPath, in my opinion, it's probably something you don't ever need anymore.
mm. Yeah, it's like a last resort if you.
No, you shouldn't ever need it anymore, ever. I think you can do much more many things. Yeah, really.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, I've not used it, but.
actually in the first draft of my book, I wrote something like, "This is bad, and you should feel bad." And
Yeah, this
it's
is.
actually a reference to Futurama, but uh, my first readers didn't get it, and they found that, well, you are just mean. I was like, okay, I can write it in a different way." Oh, XPath, I guess, was interesting because you could. It's a very rich language. Yeah, it's a query language, I would say,
Mm. Hmm.
because you can say that it's the third div after the button that has this class and whatever. The thing is, you can do many things with CSS selectors that would be quite similar. And in Playwright, you can you can chain your locators. So, yeah,
When we talk about locators and selecting the correct strategy or using the correct strategy for selecting items on the page, like I know historically loads of folks have used like scattering data test IDs around web applications to use a data test ID to interact with the element and find the element. I think in your book you mentioned you give some recommendations on how you should use these kind of locator strategies. What would you kind of recommend in terms of, is there a
yes,
priority?
yes, I do. Um, so it's kind of opinionated, but that's also what a book is about. It's well, anyway, it's my book. I do whatever I want. No, yeah, I came up with this table, kind of mixing what I think is best and also some recommendation from the private documentation. They say that they prefer user-facing locators, uh, and test ID is okay too, actually. So in this table, what I came up with, it's first the locators that are the testing library syntax,
Yeah.
and then data test ID, which is, I read it recently online. Someone talk about this as it's escape hatch. I think this is really a good image. You don't want to sprinkle data test ID everywhere in your app, and maybe as a tester you don't have the possibility to add the one test ID you need in the app quickly. Maybe you have to go ask someone or something. So what some team end up, it's just sprinkle data test ID everywhere. So it's counterproductive. And then after the testing library style locators, you have the rest, like CSS or XPath or whatever. I think if you have to remember of one locator, it's the first one, getByRole. It's really interesting because you can get an element by its role as in semantic HTML. So HTML, it's not only div and a div into a div into a div, what some people call div soup.
Yeah.
Actually, the tags of HTML, they have a meaning. They're here for a purpose. Like a button, it's a button. It's something you can press. There's some action. A link will uh, take you to somewhere, usually. In a form, you have different kind of inputs, and you can have the input by the label, or even or also can be by the placeholder. And what's really interesting is that if you use this API, then you will have to make something else than div in your DOM. So if you make a button, use the element button, it's best, or make a div with the area role button and everything that makes it a button. And if you do that, if you actually use semantic HTML, it will make your application better because it will be more testable and, as a side effect, more accessible. So if you use getByRole, for free, you have some, not a guarantee, but for free,
Yeah.
you have a little bit more quality, a little bit more accessibility in their built-in.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I like the idea where you're not focused, you've got no dependency necessarily on having to add additional IDs into the application, which I know historically, depending on how your team is set up or your workflow, it may not be easy, right, for someone to add a data test ID because there may be, especially for some contexts like with medical products or device applications, there's more of a process on any code change that happens. So it's definitely an advantage. And I like accessibility. I think it's really important. We focus on accessibility. So anything that improves the product and makes it better whilst testing it. And yeah, I think it's a win-win for everyone, right? To just use the semantic features of the HTML to get the locators. So that's yeah. I think this table has been very useful for me to think about these locators because I think sometimes we in testers in the sort of testing community and esthets and testers and all these sort of people, I think sometimes we adopt some of these patterns historically from the tools we've used in the past, and some of that becomes ingrained in our thinking around how we approach test automation projects, right? And I think they need to be revisited, right? Just like the page object model we discussed earlier. I think another one that comes up is data test ID. Do we, sometimes in the past they've been scattered everywhere across the application, but that's not necessary. And I think this table has made that quite clear that Playwright's APIs and, the training of these locators makes it very powerful, right? That you don't need necessarily to use CSS paths or XPaths like that and just kind of use the features that come with the HTML.
Yeah, different things here. It's data test ID. It's can be useful, but as you said, depending on your release schedule or rhythm and how your team is working, it might be difficult. Maybe as a QA, you don't even have access to the code itself. So you have to make some kind of request to some people, and then it takes maybe days or weeks before you get your test ID where it's needed. And the side effect of that is that you can go the other way and sprinkle data test ID everywhere just in case. But it's not very useful. And the thing is, that's the key point. None of that is very useful. It's a good escape hatch, as in you can make your test, but it doesn't add anything to the app. But if you are writing semantic HTML, it's better for the test and for the other things. And you talk about CSS and XPath. It's very interesting. Yeah, in the beginning, when I started to talk about Playwright, and I got some people to actually try it, and they were like, "Yeah, sometimes I do have to use XPath in some case." And I get that because XPath, like CSS, it's a kind of query language. Well, CSS is not a query language, but you will use the CSS queries selectors. Sorry. Well, in XPath, you can be very precise, like say that, okay, I want the first div after that child that has this name and whatever. And often XPath and CSS will be linked with the implementation details. So like maybe the elements and not the sense, the meaning of your HTML. So again, with div soup and then stuff like that. So for that, what you will do in Playwright is that you will chain the locators. So imagine you have e-commerce page with a list of products, and you want to click on the button for this particular product. So what you will do is that you will search for list item. That's one of the roles you have. So usually you will use UL for list and LI for the list item. So the LI HTML element instead of a div.
Yeah.
because it makes sense. Also for screen readers, for the
Mm,
automation, and then it's just what HTML is made for. So it
right.
represents a list item with li, and then it has a role of list item. So I need a list item, and somewhere, so that's a filter. Somewhere, no, it's not somewhere. It's among all of the list items that I will have, so a whole page maybe I will have. Um, I want the one that has this product name. So, okay, so that's this element that's in my red rectangle. And then within that list element, I will get the button, see product details. Because the thing is that in the page, we don't have it here, but in the page, all of them, it's see product details. So I don't have the see details for doc buttons. But in this way, we have, because we already selected this card, and then inside it, okay, we get the button, see product details, and then finally I can click on that. So it's really nice alternative to, let's say, XPath, because instead of having it as XPath query, you have it as locators. You make the same thing programmatically. And it can be, this example, it's already kind of intricate, but it can be even more. You can get the third line of something if it's something you really need. But also an example, I try to make it according to the rows, based on the rows and the text, because I know I want this one product. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, even if you look at the code, to me, it's very readable and clean with what we're trying to do. And it's something that the syntax here, even if you're not familiar, massively familiar with Playwright, you can kind of see what's happening, right? We're getting an element, we're filtering, and we're filtering again within the child, and then we're doing a click. So it's very nice, clean API. And I think it's so powerful because I think this kind of way of getting locators off a page and stuff wasn't very popular. It wasn't really easy to do that before, right? You had to do things with XPath. Now I think some of these more modern web first technologies have just allowed this kind of thing to happen, right? And it's very nice to see.
Yeah. And also one thing I never mentioned, it's a nice little touch that is built in Playwright. It's by default, as always with Playwright, you can change this behavior. By default, locators, they are strict. So it means
Yes.
that if something else fits this locator and I want to click on it, it will fail. And this is great because, well, in this case, it's very narrow, so it should be
Yeah.
okay. But if I make, like, I click on the C products detail button, okay, and then let's imagine you have only this one page. Okay, great. And then one day in your app, you add another C product details elsewhere on the same page. So what will happen if it was not strict is that it will click on the first one. And what if the first one is the other button, and then your behavior is totally different, and then your test is either broken or it's just working by chance, maybe, which is even worse.
Yeah.
So with strict locators, Playwright will stop here and say that, okay, which one do you want?
Yeah. Something's
Because
gone
your
wrong.
locator is not
Yeah.
good enough.
Yeah. It's a really good safety net that they've built into the framework because, with product changes all the time, the assertions you make or assumptions you make may not be true. And then tomorrow there's a new card that has the same details, and then the test magically works because it's clicking on the wrong button on the wrong card, right? And so, yeah, it's really good built-in functionality with Playwright. And Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing all your your insights into the details around locator strategies and page object model and your thoughts. I think it's really useful. And actually, I think one thing that the reason your book stood out to me is because you do have opinions about using Playwright, and they are sort of documented within your book. And it's very clear to me it's come from experience. And I've definitely read a lot of resources on Playwright, and some of them are very um, sort of factual in terms of here are all the options you have, right? But you go away and try figuring out yourself. And I think your book does provide some thoughts and opinions and makes Playwright very approachable to someone that's not used it before. So I think it's a good introduction to getting started without and having someone who's used it before give you some hints and tips, which I think there aren't many resources that do that. They either lead you down one garden path of doing it in a certain way, but here is a very much pros and cons related approach, which I think is quite powerful.
So yeah, this book is kind of opinionated for two reasons. One is that uh, playwright documentation is really good. It's really comprehensive, and so just explaining how to do stuff with playwright will be redundant. And the second thing is that, yeah, I wanted to share my experience, which I think it's slightly different from other people. I'm not a QA guy. I'm not a QA people. I'm a developer that actually writes tests and have interest in test.
That's good.
Yeah, some write tests. I mean, that's terrible. No, it's really important because actually many developers, they will rely on QA or they will over rely on QA. They will probably expect that QA will do everything about quality, and that's wrong. That's totally wrong, I feel. As a developer, you should write yourself some tests. So depends on how your team works and all. But what I usually do is that I write tests that help me to do TDD, test-driven development. In front end, it's not always easy or possible, so I just depends on. So this is usually a unit test or narrow integration test. And since I think testing is useful, I also write the end-to-end testing. Anyway, I'm in a startup, well, scale up, so we have to do the stuff. And I think in this kind of mindset, QA will add expertise to the quality and testing I'm already doing as a developer. So we have like the Free Amigos discussion. Experienced QA can help me and the team with testing strategy and so on. So yes, my book, it's from the point of view of experienced developer that's right test.
Yeah, it's good. And I think we live in a world now with we've not covered AI on this topic, but with basically in a world where developers should be owning more of their quality of the code they write. They should be testing more of their own code, and they should be writing more tests. And I think QA can't scale to anymore. We if QA is writing all the tests, or if testers are writing all the tests, then you have a scaling problem within your organization because definitely. I think I've discussed this on previous podcasts with people in big tech. Right, the big tech companies don't tend to get the testers writing all the tests because it sort of limits your ability and cadence at releasing and scaling, and also fundamentally if you're the developers writing this code, back-end code or front-end code or, an SRE operations engineer, fundamentally, you are the folks that are going to be maintaining this code. And if there's an outage or there's an incident, who's going to be woken up? It's not typically someone in QA. It's typically someone who can help fix the code live in production if it's needed to, right? So therefore, these tests need to be written, and the ownership of those tests really should come to the
Yes,
developers.
ownership. Right? That's about ownership, actually. Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
As I said, tests, if I do TDD or even if I don't do TDD, tests will help me write code and write better code, like write better HTML because I will be using semantic HTML. But if I write the test and if I maintain them as a developer, then it's my documentation. It's showing, or it's an example of what my code is supposed to do. And the thing is that the product always change. Well, it depends on your product. You mentioned some medical stuff, so in medical you don't want to change the implementation so often, or you will not add some new features so often. It's specific, but yeah, software continue, to be improved or will change, and so your code will change, will be refactored and all. And your safety net, it's your test. So as a developer, if you don't make your own safety net, and because you are the best person to know what to test and how, at least the test closer to the code or to what you are supposed to do. Then if you don't take the ownership of the code and what's around, so CI testing and all, then you don't really have ownership on your product as a developer. So yeah, just like DevOps, they're not there just to make everything for you as a developer. They are to scale stuff and help you and add some tooling in your team. It's the same for QA or tester. I think they're not there to do your job. They're there to help you, assist, or they're part of the team. I think my best experience, as a developer was in the team with one tester/QA within the team.
Yeah. Agreed.
So he was not some
External
QA service, in other building or something. He was actually in the team, so we did the Free Amigo stuff and all. But more than that, during the sprint and all, he was there. We were either pairing together to write some kind of test, or we wrote tests by ourselves, or he wrote some tests, and he was just a member of the team. And as a team, we had the ownership of everything, including the quality.
What you're saying to me is perfect. Music to my ears.
Yeah, it should be that way.
It should be that way. And I think the more it is that way, the more, I think the better quality the product is, in my opinion. And
and it's also very enjoyable to work in a team like that.
Yeah. Everyone grows because everyone's sharing and learning from each other, right? And generally, I think the team tends to communicate and collaborate better. And you can probably see that with, the releases that go out more frequently as well. So the release cadence probably increases as well. So yeah, it's all the perfect combination of a good functioning, well-functioning team, multidisciplinary. So yeah, and that also, really extends to UX as well, UX folks.
Yes,
and
true.
But I'll just give them a mention.
No, that's true. I also had another experience where we didn't have a tester in the team, but we got UX. And it was a rewriting of an app with a UX revamp, well, not really redo. And it was really cool too, actually, a really cool experience. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So fundamentally, working closely, collaborating in the same team is good. I've definitely seen experiences in my career where we've not been part of the development team and we've been a separate team. And you do get those challenges, right? Where even just to add a data test ID, if you're working on the web app, can be challenging, right? Because you're not seen as all working And it comes down to ownership. I think ownership of the test is fundamentally the key point here. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Jean. Really appreciate like your time and your insights and your discussion. So I really do appreciate it. If folks want to, find out more about your book or how to reach you, what do you recommend?
I guess my social network, LinkedIn, it's probably the best. So my name is Jean-François Greffier, and yeah, um, so here's my name. I usually answer to a private message on LinkedIn. I'm also on Blue Sky, and here's my book, Practical Playwright Tests.
Nice. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I recommend folks check it out and really appreciate your time on Tech and Test.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.